Passengers is a lot of things. Stunningly beautiful, incredibly indecisive, an emotional ride, and straight up lazy. I had high expectations going into this movie. While it's safe to say I was disappointed, I can't say I didn't like the movie. I did enjoy it, but it does have quite a few issues, the prominent one being the predictability. And that all traces back to the screenplay. Passengers is about a spacecraft traveling to a distant colony planet and transporting thousands of people that has a malfunction in its sleep chambers. As a result, two passengers are awakened 90 years early. Or at least that's what IMDb says. Passengers starts when a spacecraft has a malfunction and wakes up Jim, a passenger, 60 years older. In desperation, Jim contemplates waking up another female passenger for company. He ultimately decides to do so, and in doing that, changes her life forever. She, unaware of the situation, falls in love with Jim. This is all changed when Aurora finds out that she was woken up early. She goes into a rage, as Jennifer Lawrence is so good at doing, and pushes Jim away. That is, until the ship's malfunction grows and the two are tasked with saving it. Like I said at the beginning, this movie is lazy and indecisive. It never goes all the way. I think this is where the movie really falters. It opens as a castaway set in space. It seems to want to be a Martian-style type of movie, except smaller and bigger at the same time. In The Martian, thousands of people are trying to save one person, and in this, two people are trying to save thousands. It carries this dramatic loneliness and the inner conflict that Jim feels when he's trying to decide whether or not to wake Aurora up. It seems to establish what kind of feel it's going for within the first act. It's pretty dark given the inner conflict and the almost suicide attempts.
There is a neat moral dilemma that Chris Pratt does face in this movie that has to do with that element, and I thought that was actually really cool.
It was an interesting dynamic until Jim does wake Aurora up. The movie immediately shifts into romance. While it does show Jim feeling remorseful for a couple of scenes, he loses that when they start to feel for each other. I much rather would have seen Jim struggle with the guilt of taking this woman's life away as she falls in love with him. It would have created a strong theme that drives through the whole film, and a reason for why he's willing to sacrifice himself for her. Instead, it goes straight into a love story. For the next 20 or so minutes, it feels like I was watching a Nicholas Sparks movie set in space, which is completely different from the first third. The amazing dynamic of the inner conflict from the first third is completely scrapped. Now, the movie has a fighting chance if it stays within these two stories it's created. But unfortunately, it attempts to add a third genre into the other two.
And then, the thriller stuff, which goes down exactly how you think it's going to go down. It really does.
The main characters are thrown into a search for where the ship has failed. And when they find it, the movie becomes a full-on action.
Instead, the filmmakers kind of shoehorn in errors in the ship system that need to be fixed, and that leads to some of the more action thriller type footage you might have seen in the film's promotional campaign.
I was thinking about how this issue could have been fixed. It's all in the structure. While most structures suffer from passive characters, this movie suffers from a passive plot. Here's the difference. A passive character is a character that does nothing to move the story along. For example, Harry Potter is incredibly passive in the first film, The Sorcerer's Stone. Hagrid comes to get him from the Dursleys. Hagrid takes him to Diagon Alley. The Weasleys take him through 9 3/4. McGonagall signs him up for Quidditch. Hermione tells him to research Nicholas Flamel. Dumbledore gives him the invisibility cloak. The list goes on. For the first part of the movie, and part of the second, Harry lets things happen to him. It isn't until midway through the second movie where Harry becomes an active character. This is acceptable in most cases, and it is acceptable for a character to be passive. Aurora is a passive character in Passengers, but the issue of Passengers is that it has a passive main character and a passive plot, which brings the story to a standstill. Now yes, Jim is an active character. However, this isn't enough. Passengers does not have enough active moving pieces to make it interesting. Some movies with passive plots are interesting though. Most comedies are passive in fact. Movies like Grown Ups have passive plots and they still work. It's because you have a reason to keep watching. It's funny. You want to keep watching because you want to see the next joke. It's acceptable for some action movies have a passive plot. The reason it's okay is because you still have a reason to keep watching. It looks cool. In Transformers, for example, there's no thought required and the characters aren't interesting enough for you to care about them. So then, why is the Transformers franchise so successful? Because you can sit back and watch these giant cars destroy each other. Movies with passive plots are often known as popcorn movies. So I bet you're asking, why doesn't Passengers qualify as a popcorn movie? While it does have its charming moments and it does look cool, as mentioned before, it's lazy and it doesn't commit. Chris Pratt's charm and Jennifer Lawrence's wit aren't strong enough to support the movie on its own. The script confines the comedy to quick nuggets of charm before moving on. It doesn't build up the joke. It doesn't give the joke time to marinate. And I know I said it looked cool, but it never satisfied the audience. You only ever get quick glances into the world that might have been. If the movie would have devoted itself to exploring the ship and showing the technology, then it probably would have been enough to keep my interest for the entire movie. So, let's take a look back at the structure and how a little rearrangement might have been able to save the movie. If we start the story from when Aurora wakes up, then we meet Jim, this would be a completely different movie. We would have the perfect setup for a mystery. Jim would come off as a slightly creepy, untrustworthy character. When he first meets Aurora, he seems a little standoffish, obviously trying to hide something. The audience would question Jim. Should we trust him? Do we trust him? Does Aurora? If we saw Aurora waking up as the opening scene, and add a little bit of creepy music, boom, horror film. This makes the plot active, it engages the audience, and it makes the viewer ask questions. The mystery gives you a reason to keep watching. This plot change would turn the story on its head. It's making Jim the antagonist. Scrapping the original first act of the movie would make it impossible to sympathize with Jim and easy to hate him. Especially after it's revealed what he did to Aurora. If the movie then places the original first act immediately after Aurora finds out, it creates a conflict within the viewer. Whose side are you on? Should Aurora forgive Jim? It gives the viewer something to think about, and then they become invested in the movie. Conflict creates tension, tension creates drama, and drama creates an interesting storyline that keeps you watching. Films shown out of order can work very well if done right. In films like Memento and Pulp Fiction, the out-of-order storytelling creates tension. For example, in 500 Days of Summer, at the beginning the viewer sees Tom and Summer as a very happy couple.
You've good taste in music.
You like the Smiths?
Yeah. To die by your side is such a heavenly way to die. I love them.
Then the film very quickly shifts to a darker tone, showing Tom being depressed and sad. This leaves the viewer to wonder, what happened? Where did they go wrong? Could they get back together? For the rest of the film, the viewer pieces the story together themselves. Passenger's greatest flaw is its unwillingness to commit. It didn't commit to being a drama, it didn't commit to being a romance, and it didn't commit to being an action movie. It didn't commit on whether or not it wanted to focus on Jim's guilt or the system's failure. Given all that, I have to say that this movie is incredibly lazy. It never goes all the way. I believe that if the movie was told out of order, it would become a more interesting movie. Changing the order wouldn't solve all of its problems, but it would definitely make it less predictable. It would give the viewer a reason to keep watching, and that would be the first step in the right direction.